Okay, let's watch this Taric. What can the Samira do to this Taric? 152, 110, 105, 32, 17? Oh, minus 25? Oh. Minus 160. No. No way. So, in just 2 days, I climbed 695 LP to Plat, and in every game, I always played Samira Reroll. Samira may just be the strongest one-cost carry, and people just don't know how to play her. For example, in this clip, Samira has insane single target damage because of how much armor that she can reduce that can get really deep into the negatives, which results in a huge damage bonus. So, in this video, I'll show you something literally no one else has. And that is the hidden power of Samira Reroll and how you can capitalize and maximize her potential through things like her items and comps. But do not make the same mistakes I made. I barely slept tonight because I kept thinking about Samira, but I learned from my mistakes. And finally, I figured it all out, and now I'll take you through all of it. Her strongest items, her strongest comps, her best augments, and when you finish this video, you should know everything you need to know about the amazing unit that is Samira. So what is it about Samira that makes her so unique? Well, there's a few things, but the core reason is Samira's ability, which is exclusive to just her in this set. No one else has flat armor reduction. If you play around this ult correctly, Samira can plummet the armor of enemy units at absurd speeds. And as you'll see later, it's very simple to get the Samira setup going. For example, through her traits and her ideal items, which I'll cover in the next section, you can easily enable her ults and easily give her loads of raw stats like AD and AP that greatly increase the value of those ults. And one of the best things about Samira is that you only need to 3-star Samira, and once you have her, the choice is yours. You can play a potent 6 Noxus board, an insanely imperishable 6 Juggernaut board, or one of the many other comps I'll show you later. As a unit, Samira 3 is extremely strong, even at just 3 Noxus, as her stats are comparable to 2-star 4 costs. Although she has significantly less effective HP due to her low armor and MR. But because of Samira's low mana cost and large HP pool, that low armor and MR actually work in her favour, because if she takes damage, she's mitigating less of it, and so she's generating more mana. While this isn't that useful when Samira is chilling in the back, it's amazing when Samira is in a 1v1, as the damage she takes will result in numerous casts which will clutch you countless rounds. But it's still great to give Samira some resistances if you can through items or augments, as she will become extremely tanky. Anyway, Samira's ult has phenomenal synergy with other auxiliary AD carries that can capitalize on her armor reduction. So now, let's start getting into the juicy parts of this video. What items are the best in slot for Samira? Well, since Samira gets loads of AD and AP from Noxus, you ideally want damage multipliers that scale up her sheer raw stats. So of course, these are items like Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge, and Guardbreaker. Although I personally prefer Hodge over Guardbreaker so Samira can sustain, which is extremely useful in those 1v1s. Generally, you should make IE first, then Hodge, and then Giant Slayer. IE first allows Samira to capitalize on the Noxus AD, and this will help you to get those Noxus stacks. Then Hodge will sustain her large HP pool and give her some more crit chance for more damage. Lastly, give her Giant Slayer as she starts to run into beefy tanks. These 3 items are extremely flexible on Samira, and with them you can play any of the comps I'll show you in the next section. But you don't have to get caught up on its itemization order. If you have the components for Hodge or Giant Slayer, it's okay to just slam them. If you get any healing augment or Jeweled Lotus, you should replace Hodge or IE with Guardbreaker or QSS. QSS is particularly great on Samira if you run into a lot of chill like Eternal Winter or CC like Jarvan. I know many people recommend blue buff, but I prefer Hodge as getting 2 tiers can be difficult, and I like having more damage on Samira. Shojin is not a bad alternative to blue buff because Shojin gives Samira some AD, some AP, and still allows her to cast in 2 autos rather than 3. But do not build more than 1 Shojin on Samira. There is no difference in mana generation even if she has 3 Shojins. And while Titans can take a while to stack, it gives loads of AD and AP, and at max stacks, the tankiness it grants has great synergy with her large HP pool. But I'm begging you, please do not build items like Rageblade or Last Whisper. Samira has a low base attack speed, so it would take her much longer to get the Rageblade stacks, and Samira's ult doesn't count as an auto, so she will lose a lot of time during her cast. Samira just takes way too long to get any value out of the item, and you should avoid it at all costs. And Last Whisper is awful because it reduces armor after Samira's reduction is applied, and Last Whisper does nothing once the target's armor is in the negatives. This item is just redundant for Samira. Although Last Whisper can be extremely useful when your opponents have loads of armor, but I would still give this item to Darius rather than Samira. Anyway, I've not explored AP Samira, but I found out that instant AP is more valuable than scaling AP, as Samira getting more AP during combat won't affect armor reduction she has already applied. Although I would only recommend you play AP Samira if you want her to shred armor for your primary AD carry, because her armor reduction scales up AP. Runans is a very mid item on Samira. Since she has a ton of AD, her bolts can deal a very substantial amount of damage, but she has low base attack speed, so she won't fire bolts that often, and like Rage Blade, she won't fire bolts during her ult, so there's a lot of potential DPS lost there. But here's my item tier list for Samira, so pause here if you want a closer look. Now let's talk about Ornn items. There's only 5 worth considering on Samira, and that's Infinity Edge, Mana Zane, Gold Collector, Trickster's Glass, and Sniper's Focus. Generally, these items are just good because they're powerful items on Samira, which also gives you room to have a secondary carry. Infinity Force gives Samira an insane amount of base stats, which pair really well with items like Infinity Edge and Giant Slayer. Mana Zane gives Samira 5 casts worth of mana, so she can just liquefy frontline. Any type of execute is great for Samira to capitalize on her burst and to prevent her from getting stuck on a tank, so Gold Collector is great. Trickster's Glass is kind of insane. I can't believe this item has been unchanged for so long. The base stats from this item alone are amazing, but the clone will also benefit from the Noxus HP, AP and AD. And the difference in mana between Samira and her clone is 6 mana, which is just nothing. 2 3-star Samiras can decimate frontline, especially with all the Noxus stats. And lastly, we have Sniper's Focus, which was buffed in 13.15, and now, combined with Infinity Edge and Giant Slayer, can result in a massive damage bonus that can obliterate the enemy frontline. In summary, here's my tier list of the Ornn items on Samira, so again pause if you want to have a closer look. Now, I think the story around Radiant items is much more simple. Frankly, if you have the choice, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, it's always Radiant Giant Slayer. The damage multiplier on this item is just crazy, and nothing else comes close. Although, since Radiant items are so rare, I have not tested Radiant IE or Radiant Hodge, but I still think Radiant Giant Slayer is just far superior than anything else, but let me know what you think. And finally, to round it all off, I've not experimented with any of the Shimmer items on Samira, as I don't think she uses any of those items well, but if you try any of the Shimmer items, let me know how they feel. Now this is probably the most important part of this entire video, and that is the comps you should play around Samira. Some comps I discovered were completely overwhelming my opponents, and honestly may just be S tier comps, whereas some comps were a complete mess. Yeah. But before that, did you know that 95% of my viewers aren't subscribed to my channel? Do you reckon we could get that to 100%? But on a more serious note, if you're finding this video useful, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments. Anyway, the first Samira comp I tested was suggested to me by Leduc, and that is Ionia Samira. And this comp shines when Samira enlightens, as she can cast numerous times. But the issue with this board is that Samira is the only unit benefiting from the armor reduction, as the other backliners are AP casters and Yasper will be dashing to the enemy backline. And since Noxus isn't active, Samira won't have much AD and AP, so even though she's casting a lot, it will still take her a long time to have a substantial impact. I personally would only go this route if I wanted to move these items to Belveth later. Naturally, you would think to play a board around Challenger, but again, without Noxus, most of the other Challenger units are just better carries than Samira. So for Samira Reroll, you want to activate Noxus, but on this board you also want to activate Ionia for Yasuo so he can sustain an ult more often. This is really difficult to pull off without a Noxus spat, but if you get a Noxus spat, you should be playing 6 Noxus. This 6 Noxus comp was suggested to me by Kai, and that is a standard Noxus comp many of you are probably already familiar with, but it's got a slight twist. In this version, you reroll for Cassio and Samira 3 at 5, and then at 7 you reroll for Darius and Katarina if you can. Then at 8 you drop Warwick for Nasus and Azir. The core of this comp is Samira and Darius, while hitting the other 3 stars is impactful, it's not absolutely necessary. 6 Noxus gives a huge amount of AD and AP, which both Samira and Darius use incredibly well, especially if they have damage amplifying items like Giant Slayer and Infinity Edge. And with 3 Shurima, you can have Nasus ascending, which provides your board with a lot of frontline even without items. Ideally, you should give the Noxus spat to Nasus, as he will become tankier, his ult will last for longer, and he will do a lot more damage. This spat will also allow you to drop a Noxian and play another unit, which is ideally a 5 cost like Ahri, Ryze or Heimer. If you get a Noxus spat and then a Juggernaut spat, then at 8 you can play 6 Noxus and 4 Juggernaut, which is completely dominating, and when I tried it, I even beat a 9 Ionia and 8 Challenger board with it. That is just insane. 6 Noxus is just innately very strong. You could even have a Samira 1-star with no items still be useful for Darius, because the AP she gets from Noxus will substantially increase her armor reduction. But wait, hold on, this is not the strongest variation of Samira Reroll. I discovered the strongest Samira Reroll comp revolves around the augment Double Trouble. Giving your Noxians Double Trouble is larger than the gap between 3 and 6 Noxus. You get more AD, more AP, and the armor and MR synergizes with the Noxus HP and results in much more effective HP. So instead of playing extra Noxians you don't want to play like Swain and Kled, you can just play double Samira and double Darius, who, even at 2-star and with no items, are just stronger units because of the stats from Double Trouble and Noxus. There's a few variations of this comp which vary depending on what you hit, but ideally you always want to have at least double Darius and double Samira. I find this to be the strongest version, with Double Trouble Warwick, Cassiopeia, Samira and Darius. Now what's interesting is that Samira and Cassio scale off themselves. Multiple Cassiopeias will apply anti-heal on a unit and proc each other's bonus damage, and multiple Samiras will shred significantly more armor and deal far more AD damage. These Samiras can reduce armor by around 110 each time they ult the same target, which is completely nuts. This comp can get even stronger if you have Trickster's class on Darius and or Samira, as you'll then get a second Darius or Samira 3 that will also gain all the HP from Noxus and the tankiness from Double Trouble on top of all the AD and AP, which makes them deal loads of damage without any items and still be very tanky. And you will free up a board slot to invest deeper into other traits like Juggernaut. Now I'm certain that Prismatic Double Trouble is amazing for this comp, but I'm not too sure about the gold version, as I only managed to get it in one game, and in that one game I hit Nasus 3, so you know. And lastly, another comp I made that I've played the most is this 4 Juggernaut variation, where the strength in this comp is the tankiness of 4 Juggernauts, which buys plenty of time. In this board, if you get a Shurima spat, then you can drop Cassiopeia for Swain. Likewise, if you get a Juggernaut spat, then you can temporarily drop a Juggernaut for Swain with this spat. But do not drop Darius for Swain. I made this mistake so many times in my games, and I noticed how I started lacking damage after dropping Darius. Even though it may look weird, being 4 out of 6 Noxus and dropping Set for Swain is better, because you will have a Samira, Darius, Cassio and now Swain benefiting from the Noxus stacks, being tankier and dealing more damage. And with that Juggernaut spat, at level 8 you should aim to play 6 Juggernaut. The main problem with this board is that the ceiling is pretty low, and when I was against some of the more insane boards in my games, my win condition was a 3-star 4 cost. So if you do play this board, make sure when you hit level 8, you assess your opponent's boards, judge if you can go 9, and if not, check how many Nasus, Azir and Jarvans are out of the pool, and if your win con is 3-starring one of them. If you do go 9, I would recommend playing Ahri, Heimer or Ryze for AoE damage. But if you do manage to hit 6 Juggernaut, then this board is great because of just the sheer tankiness of 6 Juggernaut. So overall, here's my tier list of all the Samira comps. I do think that the 4 Juggernaut board is better than the Challenger and Ionia boards, and it's easier to play than the 6 Noxus board because the Juggernaut board is very consistent from game to game, especially since it's less contested. But the Noxus board has a much higher ceiling, so you should be aiming to play the 6 Noxus board. But Double Trouble comp is by far the strongest version of Samira Reroll. You can easily decide what comp to play depending on what spat you get. 6 Noxus is significantly easier to play with a spat, so if you get one, go for 6 Noxus. And if you get a Jug spat, well, go for 6 Juggernaut. If you offered both a Noxus and a Jug spat, then take the Noxus spat as it's just stronger. And if you contested Noxus, then play the 4 Juggernaut board and aim for 6 Juggernaut. And finally, if you're ever offered double trouble, then just instantly take it. But what do you do if you don't hit Samira 3? Well, a Samira 2 can carry you until you hit a 2-star 3 cost like Darius. And of course, with both Darius and Samira, it's very simple to just play the default Noxus board. So you can just move all the items to Darius or move the Hodge to Katarina if you want to. The next out is just as simple with Challenger, where you play the standard Challenger line, and once you hit Yasuo and Kai'Sa, you move the IE and Hodge to Yasuo and the Giant Slayer to Kai'Sa. Now if you hit Cassiopeia 3 and you want to keep playing her, then go for this board and aim to make a Jeweled Gauntlet on Samira to later move to Gwen. So give the items to Gwen and replace Samira with Kled, then replace Warwick with Aatrox as soon as you hit, and after that replace Kalista with Senna and move Kalista's items to Azir or Senna. But this pivot isn't nearly as easy as a Noxus or Challenger ones, and I would not recommend this comp unless both Noxus and Challenger are contested. Now, there's also some really important information and tips you should know that will transform how you play these comps. Firstly, even though Cassiopeia is great early game to apply anti-heal, she falls off hard late game despite having both Noxus and Shurima active, as she desperately needs Invoker to be a reliable carry. Cassiopeia doesn't have that in this setup, and I would not recommend itemizing her outside of TG. Cassiopeia will still be impactful through her bonus damage, so make sure you always position her behind your anti-heal. All of these Samira comps have a ton of single target damage, but very little AoE. So the biggest weakness to these comps will be huge enemy frontlines. In particular, Samira's Achilles heel is easily Scion, as he can CC Samira, shed aggro and her armor reduction, and just be really annoying for her to deal with. Scion is one of the reasons why I always aim to build Giant Slayer on Samira. You can overcome the lack of AoE by playing Ahri, Heimerdinger or Ryze, but it can be difficult to invest into these units with items. I much prefer Heimer because all you need to do is buy the turret upgrades. But AoE or not, late game you need a duo carry that can benefit from Samira's armor reduction and burst, which are units like Darius and Kalista who can execute Samira's target. Also, something I realised while making this video is that you can go full damage on Samira and still give her sustain through Aatrox's trait Darken. So being able to play an Aatrox can actually be very valuable for Samira. Now, there are items that players aren't making when they should because they help you win streak early and get the Noxus stacks. Those items are Morello and Ionic Spark. Swain takes both of these items, and as usual you can move the Spark to Katarina later. But you probably don't know that Morello is a far better anti-heal item on Swain than Sunfire is. And that's because Swain applies the Morello anti-heal in a 2 hex radius around him, and he applies it far faster than Sunfire, as Sunfire is limited to a single proc every 2 seconds. The AP will also greatly benefit Swain's ult, especially with his buffs in 13.15. But now you may wonder, who do you move the Morello to late game? And this may be surprising, but it's Nasus? When Nasus ults, the units he steals the resistances from take a small amount of true damage, which will proc the Morello anti-heal. So as soon as he ults, he procs anti-heal on the 5 nearest units. The 25 AP also means that he will be in ult form for 2 more seconds, and this results in far more tankiness than Sunfire would have provided. Although for some reason, Nasus's empowered auto won't apply the anti-heal. I think this is a bug, but I'm not entirely sure. But honestly, it doesn't really matter because that unit would have already had anti-heal applied to them anyway because Nasus would have stolen their stats. Nasus will easily generate mana from tanking and cast several times, applying anti-heal to even the enemy backline. But Protector's Vow is still nice in this case to get the first cast off much sooner. Especially with the change to Morello in 13.15, I think that Morello is the superior anti-heal item on tanks like Sejuani and Nasus, as they can apply the anti-heal from unlimited range. And lastly, you should know who or what can cleanse Samira's armor reduction. Of course, there's Edge Knight, but there's also Sign and Aatrox who cleanse when they die and revive. And the Rogue trait will also shed the armor reduction once it procs. But there are some really weird exceptions. For example, the Zord mod Hextech Exoskeleton does not cleanse Samira's armor reduction. And interestingly enough, Zhonya's Hourglass also doesn't cleanse it either. Augments vastly change how you play or itemize Samira, and you need to know this info if you want to properly play around Samira. Firstly, there are some augments that you instantly take, and that's Prismatic Double Trouble and Total Domination. These augments are insane and they provide way too much power to pass up. Of course, reroll augments are great because you save a lot of gold through the free rerolls, and you can stabilize your board much sooner as you can easily 2-star units. But do not take Frequent Flyer as you don't gain the benefits instantly and sometimes you want to econ so you can level, in which case you're not rolling at all. The other reroll augments give you free rerolls instantly and you still get value when you're not rolling. Anyway, many of the item augments are great as the items themselves are powerful and getting more items will allow you to have another carry. Of course, many combat augments are great on this board, like the damage amplifiers from Contagion and Know Your Enemy, which are amazing. Red buff also means that you don't need anti-heal and Cassiopeia will always proc her bonus damage if she autos the target first. Healing augments are good because you can drop Hodge for QSS or Guardbreaker. Likewise, Jeweled Lotus is great because you don't need Infinity Edge, and it's a huge damage increase to a Noxian board because of all the AD and AP they have. Unified Resistances synergizes extremely well with the bonus Noxus HP and makes your board very tanky. Both tons of stats and gifts from the Fallen give your units armor and MR. Gifts especially can make Samira extremely tanky, and all the damage multipliers on Samira will mean she will be dealing an extreme amount of damage with all the extra AD and AP. Now, long distance pals can be insane in two scenarios. One where you've gotten Cassiopeia 3, who can then share her bonuses with Samira, but mainly when you have Noxus Nasus. That way, Samira and Nasus can share their insane AD and AP bonuses from Noxus. Samira can become tankier through Nasus, and Nasus can steal even more resistances and AD when he ults, which Samira will also benefit from. Also, there are augments that I haven't tried yet, but I think they should be good with Samira Reroll as they are a damage multiplier or provide a lot of sustain. Now, there are some augments that seem good but can sabotage your positioning, like Social Distancing. If you're playing Double Trouble or Challenger Samira, you want the Samira clone or Callista to be right next to Samira. They can focus the same target and burst them down. Separating them can result in split aggro, which may just lose you the round. Lastly, do not go for Warwick and Set's hero augments because you will struggle to invest into their other traits, and rerolling at both 5 and 6 may mean that you'll never see level 8. I'll quickly go over legends and portals as this video is getting way too long. So of course Lee Sin is nice to hard force these comps as you get so much value out of the free rerolls early and late game. But honestly, the legend choice doesn't really matter that much, it's more so if you find yourself in a good spot to reroll for Samira. You don't need Lee Sin to be in that spot and you can play Samira reroll with practically any legend. But I would avoid this comp with Bard and Aesol as you want to level quickly with these legends. Anyway, portals that grant extra items or spatulas are always good, but I would avoid the Froyald portals because of Ryze's ability. Chill is just so detrimental to Samira, and if your opponents have a lot of chill, then you should build QSS and try to pick a healing augment or Jeweled Lotus as one of your augments. I really like Bandle Cafeteria for an easy Noxus or Juggernaut spat. As a side note, why do people give backline the Bandle HP? The HP is always better for your frontline who have more armor and MR, so they get way more value out of that extra HP. Who cares if your backline is tanky? If the enemy units are attacking your backline, you've already lost the round. Anyway, as in any reroll comp, Scuttlepuddle is good so you can recover your econ much faster. Godwillow's Grove is great to enable synergies sooner or to hit higher breakpoints like 6 Noxus or 6 Juggernaut. Also, I found out the hard way that Morrison Magnum sucks for this comp because Samira performs worse the more units the enemy has since she is single target. And lastly, I'm a big fan of Summit because it becomes really easy to 3-star your units. But of course, Samira is not a perfect unit, and she has some fundamental flaws that I think Riot need to address. For example, do you know why a Noxus spat feels so good even without the stats it provides? You can easily see the answer if you look at a board of all the Noxian units. Here you can see that they share absolutely no overlap with each other. And this is one of the biggest reasons why Noxus spat feels so good, as you have a workaround to how distant the Noxus units are, and you can play a unit that actually enables synergies. If you look at the best Noxian comps, there's only 2 due to the stark lack of diversity and flexibility in Noxus. While these comps have 6 Noxus active, they don't have any other deep trait breakpoints activated, which means that while the Noxus trait has a lot of power, it's far too difficult and risky to invest into other traits. This also affects the lower breakpoints as well, as an early 3 Noxus board will struggle to have many options. and so be weaker than other openers like the Jhin opener where Ionia provides all the value instantly. While Noxus may have a higher ceiling, you need to get the stacks, which can be very difficult to get in the early game. I wouldn't mind if Noxus got the Star Guardian treatment and had its breakpoints changed to 2, 4, 6 and 8, as Noxus would feel far better to play and make getting the stacks far easier. Now if there was a breakpoint at 2, then you could have a much stronger early game board as you could play much more flexibly around other units and traits. What I'm saying isn't that Noxus is weak or bad, but the structure of the traits is, and this needs to be changed for there to exist multiple viable and easy paths for Samira and Cassiopeia to take. In fact, this problem disproportionately affects Cassiopeia, who has 3 traits, but 2 of those have the first breakpoint at 3. Noxus is just a very disjoint trait, and I hope that this gets changed so we can see many more Noxus comps rise and enable boards like Cassiopeia Reroll. Now, another issue with Samira is the existence of Kayle and Yordles. A question I've been asking myself a lot is, why would you play Samira Reroll when you have the choice of Kayle Reroll? Kayle scales far better with her passive and Slayer, the Yordle comp is extremely easy to play, the itemization is far more simple, and you can easily enable Demacia for a free Radiant item. And because of the structure of Slayer, every time you level, you greatly increase Kayle's power by throwing in another Slayer. I find the issue here is that Kayle is suppressing all of the other potential 1-cost reroll comps because Kayle's comp has by far the highest and easiest ceiling. Now, another problem that really hurts Samira's itemization is the fact that her ult doesn't count as an auto. This means that items like Rageblade and Runant aren't nearly as good as they should be on Samira. Runant in particular is one of the best AD items because it can bypass a unit's weakness of being single target. Especially with Noxus, those bolts can do a very substantial amount of damage, but a lot of potential DPS is being lost during Samira's cast time. The issue is that Samira's ult makes her potential itemizations very narrow. Although now I'd like to ask you, should Samira's ult even count as an auto? She is just a 1-cost unit after all. Also, I have some suspicions about Samira's range. I don't know about you, but that does not look like full range to me. Anyway, did you notice how most of the problems with Samira aren't even problems with her as a unit? Rather, the biggest issues with reroll Samira is the trait structure of Noxus itself and the existence of Kayle. I hope this guide is the first guide of many for Samira, but I think she needs a smidge more to be properly viable. In the previous patch, I ran into a lot of issues with Akshan, Ahri, Sion and Karma, but they all got nerfed in 13.15. And in the same patch, Samira was bug fixed and Swain was buffed, so I think I'll continue streaming my journey of playing only this comp to see how far I can climb. But yeah, hopefully you found this video helpful. It did take a long time to make, as this is the longest video I've made in almost 10 months. But don't worry, I'll be back to a normal schedule, and I've also recently started streaming again if you want to catch me live. Anyway, I honestly think Samira has a lot of potential that players just aren't clocking onto, but now you should be aware of how good she is. But what do you guys think? Is Samira the most slept on carry in this set? Will you try these comps? And do you think Samira can have an impact on the meta? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me. And as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.